Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Yud. The vast majority of the daf is a long list of shailas, questions about situations in which you're not sure if chametz was brought into your house by mice or animals, or if you're not sure if it was removed. What is the halacha? And in the vast majority of these are shailas and cases that have existed in other areas of halacha, and the Gemara is going to compare the question regarding chametz to the questions in other areas of halacha. The Gemara is going to say the same principles apply, and the same machloksin may apply, the same concepts apply. So the first section of the list of shailas is about where you're not sure where an animal brought chametz into your house in the first place. Then we'll get to a list of situations where you're not sure it was removed, or you looked for it and you found it and you're not sure you found the right thing. Towards the end of the daf, we get to another Mishnah which discusses what happens if you forgot to do b'dika. Until when can you actually look for chametz and do the mitzvah of b'dikas chametz. So the first question on our list here is if you have a pile of chametz that's between two houses, and a mouse came and he took a piece of chametz and he went into one of the two houses. Now both houses were checked previously, and now one of them has chametz in it, we don't know which one it is. So the halacha, the Gemara says, this is very comparable to a case of two roads, and one of the two roads has a grave lying crosswise across the road, so that anybody who walks on that road is tamei. And one person walked on each road, meaning one person walked on one and another walked on the other road. Both these two people now have a shaila. One of them is definitely tamei, one of them is definitely not. Same here, the houses, one of them definitely has chametz in it, and one of them definitely has not. The question is, do you have to do b'dika? And is the person tamei? So the same halachas apply in the case of tumah as apply in the case of chametz. If they both come and ask together, what is our halacha? Then we have to tell them that, listen, one of you is for sure tamei, and one of these houses for sure has chametz in it. You both have to assume that it's you, and therefore you both are tamei, and you both have to check. If they come and ask separately, individually, then when we consider the question, we don't have to consider the other person's halacha. We could say, look, your house probably doesn't have chametz in it. You had a chazaka that previous to the mouse going in there it didn't have chametz. You could assume that it stayed without chametz. You were b'cheskas tahor. You could assume that you're still tahor. You didn't step on the grave. You could assume it was in the other house. We can blame it on the other house. We can do what's called tolin, that the tumah and the chametz are in the other person. As long as he's not here, we don't have to consider him when we're considering this question. We just consider you individually. Machlokes happens is when one person comes and he says, listen, this is a story that's happened. What's the halacha of me and my friend? What's the halacha of my house and my friend's house? That's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosi. Do we say, look, there's only one person standing here, we only have to consider him, so we'll tell him, you could assume that you're okay, and the other person will have to assume that there's a problem. Or since he's asking for both of them, we have to consider both of them, and they both have a chazaka, and we can't figure out which one it is. We have no reason to assume that the tumah or the chametz is on one over the other, and therefore both of them end up having to be assumed to be tamei or assumed to have chametz in them. And that is the machlokes in the case of the two roads, and it's also the machlokes here in the case of the two houses that might potentially have chametz in them. Okay, now the Gemara's next shaila is, what if you have a mouse which went running with a piece of chametz? You do not know if he went into any house at all. He went running towards two houses, both were checked. I don't know if he went into any, and if he went into one, I don't know which one. So the Gemara says this is very similar to a case of a valley filled with fields. The term valley in Chazalian Lashon means a collection of fields together nearing each other. And one of these fields had a grave in it. Somebody went into a field. Now we don't know if he went into the field with the grave, and even if he went into the field and grave, we don't know if he stepped on the actual grave itself. So the case like that is a machlokes between Rav Elazar and the Rabbanon. Do we say, look, there's really only one suffix, did he step on the grave or not? And therefore you have to go to Chumrah, or it's a suffix tumah b'rishas hayachid, right? Fields are considered to be rishas hayachid. At least during the growing season, they're considered to be rishas hayachid because we do not allow people to walk there. So, do we say that because it's a suffix, whether or not he stepped on the grave or not, he's tamei? Or do we say, no, there's two sveikas here. First of all, did he go into the field with a grave in it in the first place? Even if he did, maybe he didn't step on it, and therefore it's not considered regular suffix, and you can go kula. Same machlokes would apply here. You don't know if it went into any house. Even if it went into any house, you don't know if it went into your house, and therefore you would be able to rule leniently in the case of the houses as well as the case of the fields. Okay, now the Gemara says, what happens if you actually had chametz brought into your house by an animal and you went to look for it? So first of all, what if you didn't find anything? So now there's a problem because the chametz has to be in there somewhere. The fact that you checked the whole house, you didn't find anything, doesn't prove that there's no chametz there. It proves you missed it. So this is also similar to a case which we have seen. The machlokes ben Meir and the Rabbanan. If Tumah went into your house and you couldn't find it, do you have to assume that it's still there and you missed it, or could you assume that it disappeared somehow? Some creature came in and took the Tumah out. So Rameir says you have to assume it's there, and until you find it, the house is tamei. The Chachamim say, no, you just have to check until you get down. You should look through the soil at least until you get down to the bedrock, or until soil that was never disturbed from creation of the world. And then you could assume that it was taken by some creature. Here too, if you can't find the chametz, he would say, you could assume it was eaten by the mouse that brought it in, and now it's gone. You don't have to worry about it anymore. Now the Gemara says, well, hold, now, 1 second, that it's not so simple. Let's say I went into the house, I know chametz was brought into the house, I went in there and I found it. Can I assume this is the same one? Maybe it's a different piece of chametz, and the original chametz is there. Meaning I didn't check the entire house, every corner. I went in there, I found a piece of chametz. I have to do bedika on the rest of the house, or could I assume this is what was brought in there? So that's a machlokes Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Case over there is where there was a field that a grave was in it somewhere and we lost it. We don't know where. And then a while later we found the grave. We don't know if it's the right one or not. Can we assume this is the one that was lost? We have to assume that this is a different grave. And you have to go look for the original grave. You have to check the entire field and try to find if the original grave was there or not. Okay, now the Gemara has another shaila, which is interesting. Let's say you left 9 pieces of chametz in the house. This again is not an animal. You left 9 pieces of chametz in the house, and you went and you found 10 pieces of chametz. So now definitely one additional piece came. Could we assume that only one additional piece came, and you don't have to worry about anything else? You found all your 9 that you left, and an additional 10th, or do we say, hold on a second? If there's an extra one here, that means an entire bundle of 10 came that wasn't here before. I better go find my 9, and besides for all these 10, my 9 are still somewhere. These aren't even my 9. These 10 are all new. And therefore I have to check the entire house to look for my 9. Unless, of course, I can't find them, then I could assume that they were these. Now, besides for that, the Gemara says, what if you actually you hid 10, and you found 9? Do we assume that one of them disappeared and you have to go look for one all over the house? Or do we assume this entire set of 9 is a whole different set and you have to go look for your 10 that you left here, because this is not the 10 that you left here before? Now, these cases are comparable to other machlokes and discussions we've had about where you had a loaf of Meiser Sheni and you put it down and you found 2, or you put down 2 and you found 1, and the same machlokes apply over there. Now, the Gemara's next case is where you had an axe. You left the axe in your house and you came back and you couldn't find the axe. So we've seen in a brisa that the halacha is that the entire house is a tamei, because somebody obviously came here and took the axe, and we're afraid that while he was there, he was tamei and he touched everything else in the house, and they're all tamei. That's the opinion of Hashem ben Gamliel. The Rabbanan disagree, and they say, no, you don't have to assume that. You could just assume that you took it out and you forgot that you took it out, or you moved it from one corner to another corner and you forgot you moved it from one corner to another corner. The Gemara says, corner? You mean I found it? It's in a corner? I thought you told me it was lost. The Gemara says, yeah, there's a phrase missing in the Mishnah over here. The case is that it was lost, meaning you left an axe in the house and you came back and it was gone, or you came back and you found it in a different corner. And there we have this machlokes. Could you assume that you forgot it? You forgot the fact that you moved it, or do you have to assume that somebody else was here, and if that's true, then everything has his tummy, because he could have been a tummy person who came and took your things. Okay, now the Gemara has a list of just shilas brought by Rava. Rava says, first of all, he says, halacha, if you see a mouse take a piece of chametz into your checked house and you come in and you find crumbs on the floor, do not assume that this is the piece of bread, because mice generally don't crumb things up. When mice bring in bread, they eat it completely, they don't leave crumbs behind. If, however, a child brought it in and then you find crumbs, then you can assume that these crumbs are that which the child brought in, because children often do crumb things up, and that's why we have this over here. Next, Rav has a shaila. If a mouse comes in, you see a mouse enter the house with a piece of bread in his mouth, and you see a mouse leave with a piece of bread in his house, could you assume same mouse, same bread, and you don't have to do Badika? Or maybe this is a different mouse, and the original mouse is still in there, and you have to go find him and his bread. Now, if you say that, what about if the mouse that went in was white, and the mouse that comes out is black? Now, it's definitely a different mouse. Could you assume it's the same bread? Or do you have to assume that it's a different piece of bread, different because mice don't steal from each other? And if you say that, what happens if the animal that came out was not a mouse? A mouse went in with a piece of bread, and a weasel came out with a piece of bread. Now, you have no assumption that mice don't steal from each other, so this case you would say this is a different piece of bread, or can you assume it's the same bread and he stole it from the mouse? Or do you say, listen, if the weasel was planning on stealing from the mouse, he'd steal the mouse with the bread. You would end up finding him with the mouse and the bread both in his mouth. Now, the Gemara says, well, what if I actually do find a weasel with the bread and the mouse in his mouth, but the mouth of the weasel is separately holding the mouse and the bread? The bread is not in the mouth of the mouse. So in a case like that, what do you say? Do you say that he separately picked up a mouse and a separate piece of bread, or do you say that this is that mouse? Just the mouse dropped his piece of bread when he saw the weasel coming, and he got scared, and that's why the weasel is holding them separately. So the Gemara says on all these questions, at Teiku, we do not have a psak. Rava adds a few more unrelated questions. He says, do you have to do bedikas chametz on a piece of bread that's high up on a beam, which you aren't going to climb up to eat on Pesach? Do you have to take that off before Pesach? Or could you say, listen, it's not going to fall? Or do you have to be afraid that it might fall, and if it falls, then you'll end up eating it? And if you tell me I do have to be afraid that it might fall, what if you have a hole deep in the ground and a piece of bread at the bottom of the hole? Do you have to get a ladder and go get it out? Here it's definitely not going to fall. It's not going to end up coming out of the hole on its own, but do we have to be afraid that you may go in there to get something and you'll end up picking up the piece of bread and eating it? And this is unresolved. Unrelated, Rava says, what if you have a snake in your house and the snake has a piece of bread in its mouth? Do you have to hire a professional snake charmer to go get the bread away from him? Or the Rabbanan ask you to do bedikas chametz, they ask you to strain your body to do bedikas chametz, they not ask you to go hire people. If you have to do bedika, which requires hiring, that you're not obligated to do. And this takes us to the next Mishnah, which discusses the proper times for doing bedikas chametz. Now, the Mishnah quotes a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. They both give 3 times for bedikas chametz. Rabbi Yehuda says bedikas chametz is the night of the 14th, and the morning of the 14th, and the time of actual biur chametz when you're actually destroying it, which is at concise, midaraisa, or an hour or two earlier, midarabanan. The Chachamim say you can also do bedika afterwards. Now, the language of the Mishnah seems to imply that Rabbi Yehuda is saying that you have to do bedikas chametz 3 times, all 3 times. And the Chachamim are saying, listen, you have to do it one of these 3 times, and if you didn't do it the first time, do it the second time. If not, the third time. If not, then you do it any time afterwards. Now, the Gemara will challenge that. Just the Mishnah ends off and says that once you do bedika, you should make sure to put the chametz away somewhere carefully so that you won't have to go looking for it if it should suddenly disappear. Now, the Gemara says that the implication of again here is that Rabbi Yehuda says you have to do 3 bedikas chametz. Where does he get this halacha? You have to do bedikas chametz 3 times from? So the Gemara says there are 3 psukim which discuss destroying chametz. Lo yer lecha chametz velo yer lecha se'or. Shavas yom masor le'mas bevatechem. Ach b'yom rishon tashbishu se'or mi batechem. 3 psukim. So therefore you have to do 3 times. Now the Gemara brings a brisa though, which makes it clear that Rav Yosef asks from a brisa which seems to imply, makes it pretty clear that Rav Yehuda is not saying you have to do bedika 3 times. He's saying there are 3 times for bedika. If you missed the first, you should do it the second, and if not, then the third. Just like the Chachamim, the difference is afterwards. The Chachamim say if you missed the 3rd time, so then do it any time afterwards. It's already Pesach, it's already asur to have chametz, do bedika. Rabbi Yehuda says no. If you missed the time before, once the time of Isser Chametz starts, you should not be doing bedikas chametz anymore. What's the machlekes? Machlekes is, do we tell you not to do bedikas chametz at a time when it's asur for you to eat it? Because maybe while you're doing bedika, if you find something, you're going to eat it. Therefore, we say, you know what? Let's just pretend that nothing ever happened, and don't look for it, because then it's going to make things worse. Now, Rabbi Yehuda seems to hold that you should not do bedikas chametz after. So the only machlokes, they all agree on the 3 times. They all agree you don't have to do it 3 times. There are just 3 set times in which one should do bedikas chametz. The question is, if you missed the 3, should you do it afterwards? Do we have to make gzera? You may come to eat it. Now the Gemara asks, you're telling me that Rabbi Yehuda makes this gzera. It's not true. I'll show you that he doesn't make gzera, that you may come to eat something. What's the case? We're talking about the carbon aimer. We know that the halacha is you're not allowed to use grain or barley that took root after carbon aimer was brought until next year's carbon aimer. Well, then it will not have taken root after carbon aimer, because the carbon aimer comes later. However, you were allowed to pick the grain and store it and have it all heaped up ready to go before the Korban Omer is brought, and then when the Korban Omer is brought, then everybody can go grind and cook and bake and do whatever they have to do. And Rabbi Yehuda says that it was Rabbi Meir says that was Shaloi b'Ratzain Chachamim. The sages weren't pleased that people were having the things stored up because they were afraid they would end up eating it before the Korban Omer was brought. Rabbi Yehuda said no, the Chachamim didn't mind. There was no problem with it. So you see that Rabbi Yehuda says there is no gzera, you may eat it while you're working with it. The Gemara says that is different. Rabbi Yehuda over there doesn't say there's a gzera because since you have to pick it in a funny way, you're not allowed to harvest it with machines. You have to pick it by hand. People will remember not to eat it. However, in the case of chametz, while you're doing bedikas chametz, you may end up eating it.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.